Imagine a nation on the brink of collapse, its youth hungry for hope, its people standing against impossible odds. One man, Ibrahim Traoré, red beret gleaming, rises not just as a leader, but as a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and vision. Today we dive into the untold story of how he inspired a generation, rebuilt a nation, and left the world in awe. This is more than history. It's a lesson in resilience, patriotism, and the power of education. Stay with us as we uncover every dramatic turn, every shocking challenge, and every moment that shaped Burkina Faso's future. And if you enjoy this cinematic journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that will blow your mind. There are lands on this earth where silence weighs heavier than sound, where the winds blow over cracked soil, carrying with them whispers of forgotten dreams, where the laughter of children should echo through valleys, but is instead swallowed by hunger, hardship, and the shadows of history. One such land lies in the heart of West Africa, Burkina Faso. For decades, outsiders described it only in statistics. One of the poorest countries on earth, one of the least literate, one of the most forgotten. They wrote it in reports and measured it in numbers, but they never asked what it meant to be a child growing up there, to wake each day and wonder if school even existed for you, to wonder if tomorrow would be any different from yesterday. Villages, schools were sometimes nothing more than wooden shacks, their roofs torn away by storms, chalkboards cracked, desks missing, teachers unpaid. In some regions, there were no schools at all, only trees where children gathered under the shade, scratching words into the dirt with sticks, memorizing letters that would fade with the next gust of wind. The West rarely noticed. For them, Burkina Faso was a small country with little influence. Its wealth was buried beneath the soil, gold, cotton, and other treasures. But its people were not seen as treasures themselves. Colonization had stripped away not only resources, but dignity. What was left was a silence that seemed unbreakable, and yet, within that silence, something stirred. Because silence can also become unbearable. And from the weight of despair, a voice can rise, a leader can emerge. Not born of privilege, not dressed in gold, but shaped by the same hardship, the same hunger, the same forgotten soil. That leader was Ibrahim Traoré. When Traoré first appeared on the political stage, the world noticed him as a soldier, a man, in uniform, a fighter. But beneath the red beret, beneath the military speeches, there was something deeper, something most foreign analysts failed to see. He was not only a general of the battlefield. He was a student of Thomas Sankara's dream, a believer that the greatest revolution is not of weapons, but of minds. He had walked the dusty paths himself as a child. He knew the pain of villages without schools, of parents who could not read, the letters they received, of futures trapped by ignorance. He remembered the frustration of studying by candlelight, the hunger in his stomach louder than the words on the page. And he remembered making a promise to himself. If I ever have power, I will not let the children of Burkina Faso grow up in darkness. That promise became the seed of a vision. When Traoré looked into the eyes of the youth, he did not see weakness. He saw an army, not of soldiers, but of thinkers, creators, builders. He saw the future of Africa itself, resting in their hands. He knew the soil of Burkina Faso was not only rich in gold, but in something far more valuable, the minds of its children. And so, as the world continued to measure Burkina Faso only in poverty, he began to speak differently. In speeches, he reminded the people, the chains that bind us are not only around our necks or our wrists, they are in our minds. They are in the lies we've been told, that we are too poor to rise, too weak to stand, too small to matter. But, I tell you, a nation that educates its children is never small. A people who raise thinkers are never weak. And a land where hope is taught in every classroom is never poor. At first, his words seemed impossible. Parents who could not afford school uniforms looked at him with cautious hope. Children who worked in fields wondered if such dreams could truly belong to them. Elders, who had seen promises broken before, asked themselves if this leader would be different. But then, the changes began, slowly, quietly, and then, like a river breaking through a dam. Traoré ordered that abandoned government buildings be turned into makeshift schools. Soldiers were sent not only to guard borders, but to build classrooms with their own hands. Books were collected, not bought from foreign publishers at high prices, but written and printed locally, filled with lessons of Burkina Faso's own history, its own heroes, its own pride. In villages where no school stood, teachers began teaching. Under mango trees, their voices carrying through the air like hymns. Children sat on stones, on the ground, on each other's laps if they had to. But they listened. They listened because someone was finally speaking to them, not as burdens, not as statistics, but as the future of the nation. It was in these moments that Traoré revealed the true battlefield of his revolution. It was not in the deserts against insurgents alone. It was in the minds of the young. Because he knew, guns may defend borders, but knowledge defends freedom. And so he told them, if we fail to learn, others will rule us forever. But if we learn, we will rule ourselves. These words became a spark. Children repeated them on their way home. Teachers wrote them on chalkboards. Parents whispered them by firelight. Soon the entire nation knew the phrase. It was no longer just a sentence. It was a call to arms of the mind. Foreign observers, used to seeing African leaders speak of wars and minerals, were caught off guard. They wrote confused articles. Why is Traoré focusing on schools when his country faces insecurity? But what they failed to understand was this. Security without knowledge is temporary. Knowledge builds a fortress that no army can tear down. Still, doubts remained. Could a nation so poor truly rise through education alone? Could books really be stronger than bullets? Could classrooms heal wounds left by centuries of colonization? These were the questions whispered in the markets, in the homes, in the quiet moments before sleep. But Traoré did not waver. He knew that revolutions are not built in a day. They are planted like seeds, watered with patience, and protected with sacrifice. He knew the road ahead would be long, filled with obstacles, resistance, and even sabotage. But he also knew this. Every empire begins with a vision, and his vision was clear. A Burkina Faso where no child is left in darkness. A Burkina Faso where patriotism is not blind loyalty, but educated love for the land. A Burkina Faso where sacrifice is not only dying for the nation, but living for its future. A Burkina Faso where hope is not just a dream, but a subject taught in every classroom. This, he told them, is the beginning of a new dawn. And with that, Act 1 closes, not with explosions, not with gunfire, but with the image of a child, sitting under a tree, holding a book, the sun setting behind him. A child who, for the first time, believes that tomorrow might be brighter than today. Because, for the first time, someone has told him, your mind is the weapon, your future is the battlefield, and your victory will be the freedom of your people. Change never arrives without resistance. And in Burkina Faso, as Ibrahim Traoré's call for education and sacrifice began to echo from village to village, not everyone welcomed it. Some dismissed it as rhetoric. Others saw it as a threat. And many wondered if a nation so starved, so battered by decades of neglect, could truly afford to dream of schools and classrooms when even bread and safety were scarce. Yet, in the hearts of the young, something was shifting. For the first time in generations, children were not hearing leaders speak only of war, or gold, or foreign aid. They were hearing a message that belonged to them. Traoré was not promising riches overnight, nor pretending the path would be easy. He was offering something more powerful, a chance to matter, to build, to be remembered, and that was a fire no one could extinguish. The first schools built under his directive were simple, almost crude. Clay walls, tin roofs, chalkboards, made from wood painted black. There were no gleaming libraries, no polished marble floors, but they were alive with voices. Teachers who had once abandoned the profession returned, inspired by a government that finally valued them. Soldiers, their rifles set aside, carried bricks and dug foundations. Villagers contributed stones, wood, and food for the builders. Children came barefoot, some walking miles, clutching slates and broken pencils. But they came. And in those early classrooms, something astonishing happened. Children began to dream aloud. They no longer spoke only of surviving another season of drought. or finding work in neighboring countries. They began to speak of becoming engineers, doctors, poets, leaders. They began to ask questions no one had asked in years. Why not us? Why not here? Why not now? For Traoré, these were the moments he had envisioned. He visited these schools, in person, still in his military uniform and red beret, not as a distant president but as a comrade. He sat with the children on dusty floors, read their essays, and listened to their songs. He reminded them, "Do not believe you are too small. You are the flame, and a single flame can burn down centuries of darkness." The youth repeated his words like scripture, in the markets, in the fields. Even at the wells, mothers began to hear their children chanting, "We are the flame, we are the flame." But where hope grows, fear also rises. The old elite, those who had profited from corruption and foreign dependency, saw danger in this new awakening. For decades, they had ruled over a population that believed itself powerless. A nation of dreamers was a threat to their wealth and control. Foreign corporations, too, whispered in boardrooms. An educated Burkina Faso is a dangerous Burkina Faso. They will demand fair trade. They will refuse exploitation. And so, resistance began. Some elites spread rumors that Traoré was brainwashing the youth. Others claimed education was a waste when the country could barely afford food. Foreign media mocked him. The soldier who thinks books can stop bullets. But Traoré refused to bend. He knew these voices were echoes of fear, not truth. And to his people, he answered simply, "They tell you books are useless. Why? Because they fear what you will learn. They fear the day you no longer need them. They fear the day an African child holds not only a shovel but a pen, because a pen writes freedom, and freedom is the one thing they cannot steal." These words spread like wildfire. What the critics intended as an insult, "Books cannot stop bullets," became a rallying cry. In villages, murals appeared on walls, a child holding both a pen and a shield, with the words, "Knowledge is our weapon." By the second year of this campaign, schools had doubled in number. Literacy rates, once stagnant, began to climb. But, perhaps more important than numbers, was the spirit that filled the nation. Youth groups began to form, calling themselves Sons of Sankara, Daughters of Faso, and the New Flame. They organized debates in courtyards, poetry readings in markets, even small science fairs where children presented inventions made from scrap metal and broken radios. One boy in Bobo Dioulasso built a wind-powered water pump to irrigate his village. A girl in Ouagadougou wrote a play about the history of Burkina Faso, performed entirely by children, which left audiences in tears. A group of teenagers started translating Traoré's speeches into songs, played on drums and guitars, sung in native tongues across the countryside. These were not the acts of a wealthy nation with endless resources. These were the acts of a poor nation refusing to accept poverty as its identity, and the world began to notice. Journalists who once ignored Burkina Faso now arrived in waves. Some were skeptical, others curious, but all were struck by what they saw: a country in struggle, yes, but also in motion. One article in a French newspaper read, "Burkina Faso, the nation where children carry the revolution." A West African columnist wrote, "While others fight for power, Traoré fights for pencils." But not all attention was kind. Western powers worried about the narrative spreading across Africa. If one small, landlocked nation could begin to rise through education and unity, what would stop others from following? They tried to frame Traoré as a radical, a populist, even a dictator in disguise. And yet, every time they attacked him, his popularity at home only grew stronger. Because his people saw something they had never seen before. A leader whose actions matched his words. Traoré did not preach blind nationalism. He did not tell the youth to love their country simply because they were born there. He told them to earn that love through sacrifice. He explained sacrifice not as dying in war, but as giving up comfort for the future. Walking miles to school, sharing books, helping build classrooms, teaching younger siblings what you learned that day. Speeches, he said, patriotism is not wearing a flag. It is carrying each other when the road is heavy. It is giving your time, your sweat, your hunger today, so that tomorrow your children will not know that same hunger. And slowly, this message began to reshape the culture. Children once ashamed of poverty began to take pride in their resilience. Parents who once urged their children to leave for better opportunities abroad now encouraged them to stay and fight for a better homeland. The very idea of sacrifice, once associated only with soldiers and martyrs, was reborn as the duty of every citizen. But revolutions always draw enemies. Extremist groups, seeing the rise of educated youth, tried to disrupt schools. In some regions, they burned classrooms, threatened teachers, and kidnapped students. Their message was clear. Knowledge will weaken you. Obey us. But instead of fear, these attacks bred defiance. Communities began guarding schools at night. Parents slept outside classrooms to protect them. Soldiers doubled patrols, but more importantly, ordinary villagers stood together, refusing to let darkness return. One teacher, whose classroom was destroyed, rebuilt it with his students, the very next week, he said, "They burned our walls, but they cannot burn our minds, and tomorrow we will write on those ashes." Stories like this spread across the nation, fueling resilience. Burkina Faso was no longer just surviving. It was awakening. The cracks of doubt remained, yes. Hunger still stalked villages. Insurgency still bled borders. Foreign powers still loomed. But amid the chaos, one thing was unshakable. The youth had found their voice. They no longer waited for someone else to save them. They believed in themselves. They believed in the power of sacrifice, of education, of unity. And they believed in the man who had lit the flame, Ibrahim Traoré, the soldier who dared to tell them that books could be stronger than bullets. And as the sun rose on another day in Burkina Faso, one could hear, carried by the winds across fields and rivers, the chants of children walking to school. "We are the flame. We are the flame." A sound louder, stronger, and more dangerous to the enemies of progress than any gunfire. Because this was no longer just a movement. It was a revolution of the mind. The night pressed heavily upon Ouagadougou, the capital dim and tense beneath a sky swollen with restless clouds. In the streets, the air smelled of smoke and hunger. Vendors had closed their stalls early. Mothers clutched thin baskets with little to carry home, and whispers of betrayal moved faster than the evening wind. The world outside Burkina Faso had grown merciless. Sanctions tightened, fuel lines shrank, food shipments delayed, and rumors swirled of nations plotting not just to weaken Ibrahim Traoré's government, but to collapse it altogether. Inside, the presidential compound, a flickering generator powered the halls. Ibrahim stood before a long wooden table covered in maps and reports, his red beret casting a shadow across his eyes. Around him, aides spoke in low tones, their voices weighted with worry. Numbers told a story of suffering, schools unable to buy chalk or paper, hospitals without basic supplies, families cutting one meal into 2 days' worth of scraps. Yet even more suffocating than the material lack was the psychological war, the sense that betrayal lurked somewhere within his own circle. Traoré's generals swore loyalty, yet their eyes carried hesitation. Each meeting stretched thin, each promise spoken but not trusted. He knew too well the history of African leaders brought down not by foreign bullets alone, but by local hands turned for promises of power, money, or escape from pressure. He sensed that time was slipping. Burkina Faso could not endure another winter like this. The youth looked to him as the symbol of defiance. But what if their faith turned brittle in the face of starvation? What if despair conquered before hope had the chance to bloom? One evening, as he left the compound for a visit to a local school that still held classes despite shortages, he saw the reality laid bare. The children sat cross-legged on dusty floors, some writing letters in the dirt, with sticks because notebooks had vanished into the black market. Their teacher, a woman with cracked hands and a weary smile, kept speaking about Sankara's dream, about Africa building its own path, about self-reliance, about dignity. When Ibrahim entered, the children rose, their eyes wide, not with fear, but with expectation. They sang a song, a fragile melody about a future without hunger, a chorus trembling with innocence. The moment hit him harder than any sanction. These children had nothing, no chalk, no books, no shoes, yet they still carried belief. Belief in him. Belief that he could deliver a future that even their parents could no longer imagine. It was then he realized. The battle was no longer about policies or negotiations. It was about the soul of the youth. And if he lost that, he lost everything. But the world was tightening its grip. That same night, across the ocean, closed-door meetings in Western capitals drew lines in sand. A decision was made. Burkina Faso's defiance could not be allowed to spread. If Traoré continued to ban Western chains, reject debt conditions, and inspire other African nations, a spark might ignite a continent-wide fire. And so the orders went out, not only to increase sanctions, but to infiltrate, destabilize, and, if necessary, remove him altogether. Back in Ouagadougou, the signs of infiltration were already visible. Strange men appeared in markets, spreading rumors that Traoré was hoarding wealth, that his government had secret deals, that he lived in comfort while the people starved. Leaflets appeared overnight, printed with lies designed to break faith. Soldiers began hearing whispers in barracks that perhaps another leader could bring food back, even if it meant bending to the West. Traoré responded not with rage, but with resolve. He doubled his visits to the poorest neighborhoods, walking barefoot through muddy streets, eating from the same bowls as the hungry, and listening to the anger without flinching. Each time he did, the youth gathered, forming protective circles around him, their chants rising like a shield against despair. They began calling themselves les gardiens, the guardians, ordinary young men and women who vowed to defend his vision not with weapons, but with unshakable loyalty and the power of unity. Yet loyalty alone could not stop the shadows gathering. Late one night, as rain hammered the city, an anonymous message reached his desk. 3 names, 3 figures, all within the structure of power, all suspected of being courted by Western envoys. Each was offered wealth, safety abroad, and the promise of influence in exchange for betraying Traoré. The message gave no proof, only whispers, but the seed of danger was planted. He did not act immediately. To accuse without certainty would fracture the fragile unity he still had. Instead, he watched. He tested. He spoke words in meetings meant only for certain ears, and when those words reappeared in distorted form outside the walls, he knew the leak was real, the betrayal was alive. The pressure reached a fever pitch one morning when word arrived that fuel reserves had dropped to critical levels. Without fuel, water pumps would stop, hospitals would shut down, and entire regions would sink into darkness. Crowds gathered at empty stations, arguments turned into riots, and the air thickened with the smell of desperation. In one district, a mother collapsed from exhaustion while queuing all night, her child crying at her side. Images of her struggle spread quickly, painting a picture of a nation at the edge of breaking. Western outlets seized on these images, branding Traoré a failed leader. Commentators spoke of an inevitable collapse, of a country eating itself from within. Offers came again, cloaked as solutions. Lift the bans, allow foreign companies to return, surrender sovereignty in exchange for food and fuel. Each offer came, not as a gift, but as a chain, one that would bind Burkina Faso back into dependency. Still, the youth resisted. Better to starve free than feast in chains, they cried. And yet freedom without bread is a cruel test. Their voices, though, fiery, were strained with hunger. Ibrahim knew he had to act, not just with speeches, but with something bold enough to shatter despair. And so, in secrecy, he devised a plan that would either save his people or destroy him. He called for alliances beyond the traditional powers, nations, outside the Western orbit, countries that had faced similar pressures and learned to survive. Midnight calls were made, envoys sent quietly, deals whispered in codes. Weeks passed in tense silence until finally, one night, a convoy crossed into Burkina Faso. Trucks carrying fuel, grain, and medicine arrived, not from the West, but from partners who saw in Traoré's defiance a chance to rewrite history. The size. Relief was immediate. Hospitals lit again, bakeries reopened, and pumps roared to life. The people wept, not just for the aid, but for the proof that survival without submission was possible. For a moment, hope soared. But hope threatened the powers outside. The West, shocked by his survival, intensified their hidden war. Payments flowed into the hands of conspirators, and soon the betrayal inside the government was no longer whispers. It was a blade waiting in the dark. Traoré knew the climax was near. The youth had risen, the world had turned hostile, and his enemies were no longer only foreign, they were inside his walls. And as night settled over the capital, heavy with the weight of storms, he realized that the coming days would decide, not just his fate, but the very meaning of freedom for a generation unborn. The rain fell harder that night, each drop striking the windows like a warning drumbeat. Inside the dimly lit presidential compound, silence carried the weight of suspicion. Ibrahim stood alone in his office, staring at the storm as if it could give him answers. He had known the West would not stop at sanctions, that their weapons were often invisible, rumors, bribes, betrayal. But now the danger was no longer abstract. The betrayal had faces. Faces that dined at his table, saluted his flag, called him brother. The anonymous message had given him 3 names. Each man still walked freely through the compound, their voices calm, their smiles rehearsed. Yet he could feel the invisible cracks widening in every meeting. Sometimes, when he entered a room, conversations stuttered to a halt. When he gave orders, he noticed subtle hesitations before they were carried out. Once, when he left the map table, he found a folded note tucked beneath it. You cannot trust them. No signature, just the quiet handwriting of someone watching from the shadows. But to act recklessly was to risk collapsing everything. If he accused the wrong man, he would shatter the unity that still held the army together. If he waited too long, the conspirators might strike first. He needed proof, not just whispers in the dark. So he devised a test. He summoned his closest counsel, the men and women who claimed to be his loyal shield. The red beret sat firm on his head, his eyes scanning each face with measured calm. There are reports, he said, his voice low, deliberate, that fuel reserves from the east have been sabotaged. Our convoys will move at dawn to secure a hidden depot. Only we know this. The room stirred, each figure nodding, taking notes. But the truth was this. There was no hidden depot, no convoy, no reserves. It was a lie, crafted as bait. Ibrahim said nothing more, dismissed the meeting, and waited. The following morning, before the first light of sun touched the city, his intelligence chief entered the office, face pale. Captain, he said, almost whispering, foreign drones were spotted circling a road that leads directly to the depot you described. The trap had worked. Someone had carried the lie outside the walls. The betrayal was real, alive, breathing among them. That night, he walked the compound with heavy steps, the echoes of his boots following him like ghosts. He stopped in the courtyard where young soldiers trained despite the rain, their rifles slick with water, their chants sharp with loyalty. These youths had no wealth, no comfort, only their faith in him. And somewhere in the rooms above, traitors plotted against that very faith. He clenched his fists, feeling the weight of his country pressing against his chest. He had promised the youth that their hunger would not be in vain, that their sacrifices were seeds of freedom. If he fell now, if betrayal cut him down, everything they had endured would be mocked, wasted, erased. The storm inside the compound broke open days later. A coded message intercepted by his allies revealed the plan in brutal clarity, a coup attempt, set for the night of the independence celebrations. While the youth filled the streets with chants of unity, while the world's eyes looked elsewhere, the traitors would strike. They had secured weapons, bought silence, even promised foreign aid once the red beret was removed. The revelation struck him like a bullet, but it also gave him clarity. Now he knew, now he could prepare. He did not confront them immediately. Instead, he played the role of the unaware. He shook hands, he listened to their counsel, he allowed them to believe their deception was hidden. At night, he met in secret with the guardians, the youth who had pledged loyalty without condition. He gave them no weapons, only instructions. Watch, listen, protect the streets, shield the schools. You are not soldiers, he told them. You are the heartbeat of this nation. Guard it. The day of the celebration came. The capital bloomed with color despite the shortages. Cloth flags stitched by mothers hung from balconies, children painted their cheeks with the nation's colors, and music carried on borrowed instruments filled the air. The world saw a struggling country still alive, still proud. But beneath the drums and dancing feet, the silence of conspiracy coiled tight. As night fell, the city lit with torches and laughter. In the presidential palace, Ibrahim addressed the nation. He spoke not of victory or power, but of sacrifice. of the hunger that cut deep yet proved their strength, of the belief that freedom was worth every hardship. His words carried across radios, through crowded streets, into small villages where old men leaned close to listen. But as the final words left his lips, movement stirred in the darkened wings of the palace. A signal flashed, boots shuffled, metal clicked. The traitors were ready. The first shots never came. Instead, doors burst open as Ibrahim's loyal guard stormed in, weapons raised, faces fierce. The traitors froze, their plans unraveled. For weeks, every whisper they had spoken had been shadowed, every secret meeting tracked. Their betrayal had been allowed to grow, only so it could be cut out completely. The room erupted in chaos, shouts, fists, the clash of boots. One of the conspirators lunged for a weapon, but was slammed against the wall by young soldiers half his age. Another begged for mercy, spitting promises of wealth and forgiveness. Ibrahim stood in the center, unmoving, his red beret bright beneath the dim lights. "You sold your country for breadcrumbs," he said, his voice sharp as a blade. "You thought freedom was too heavy to carry, so you chose chains. But this generation," he pointed toward the young guards holding the traitors down, "this generation will not kneel." The coup crumbled before it began. Those who had plotted were dragged away in silence, their faces pale, their power stripped. Outside, the youth still sang, their torches bright, unaware that in the shadows their future had nearly been stolen. That night, Ibrahim did not celebrate. He sat quietly in his office, the weight of what nearly happened pressing on his chest. Victory had come, but it was not final. For every traitor unmasked, there would be another waiting. For every foreign scheme crushed, a new one would rise. The war for Burkina Faso's future was not a single battle. It was a lifetime of resistance. Yet when dawn broke, and he walked out to see children already gathered in the streets, waving flags stitched by their mothers, smiling despite their empty stomachs, he felt the fire burn again. These children deserved more than survival. They deserved a future built on dignity, on sacrifice, on hope. And as long as his red beret still sat upon his head, as long as the youth still chanted his name, he vowed he would not let betrayal, hunger, or empire break them. The fight was only beginning. The morning after the foiled coup should have been calm, but instead the air was thicker, heavier, like a forest before lightning strikes. Ibrahim knew the night's victory was only the first cut in a much larger battle. Traitors had been captured, yes, but whispers still spread like smoke. In the markets, women trading tomatoes muttered of foreign troops spotted at borders. In the mosques and churches, sermons carried hidden warnings. On the radios, static interrupted speeches too often to be coincidence. The West had lost its pawns inside the palace, but they had not lost the game. They were waiting, gathering, tightening the noose around Burkina Faso's neck. He gathered his commanders, the most loyal of the Red Berets and the few civilians who still dared to stand beside him. Maps covered the long table, lines drawn in, ink marking borders where strange movements were reported. "They won't stop with bribes and whispers," Ibrahim said, his hands flat against the wood. "They will come with steel, and when they do, they won't only want me. They'll want the heart of this country, the youth, the schools, the villages. We cannot wait for the storm to strike. We must be the storm." But even as he spoke, his chest burned with the weight of responsibility. He thought of the children waving flags, of the mothers stitching cloth with tired fingers, of the young soldiers who had chosen hunger over surrender. They were watching him, depending on him. If he fell, their hope would collapse with him. The burden pressed hard, but the fire inside him was harder. Days blurred into tense nights. The city prepared not for celebration, but survival. Volunteers built barricades at the edges of neighborhoods. Mechanics repurposed broken-down trucks into armored barricades. Teachers turned classrooms into shelters, chalkboards still covered, with lessons on history and language now hidden behind stacks of sandbags. Every citizen became a soldier in spirit, if not in arms. And Ibrahim walked among them, his red beret bright in the dust, his voice steady even when his heart was heavy. Then, the strike came. It began at the northern border, a sudden clash of gunfire in the night. Foreign mercenaries dressed in uniforms without insignias, slipping across with weapons far too advanced for any local militia. Villages went dark as electricity lines were cut. Roads were mined, bridges destroyed. The enemy moved like shadows, silent but devastating, their mission clear. Destabilize, terrorize, bleed the people until resistance crumbled. Word spread like wildfire. By dawn, the city was boiling with fear. Markets closed, streets emptied, radios screamed warnings. Ibrahim called his generals, but the real strength came not from them. It came from the youth. Young men and women flooded to recruitment points, some carrying nothing but machetes, others old rifles passed down from their grandfathers. "Give us the chance," they shouted. "We will fight." The palace became the nerve center of resistance. Ibrahim refused to hide. Instead, he stood on the balcony overlooking the courtyard, speaking directly to the masses gathered below. His voice carried over loudspeakers, deep, unwavering, cutting through the fear like a blade. "They come with guns bought in gold," he declared, "but we stand with a fire they cannot buy. They come with lies, but we hold truth. They come to chain us, but we have chosen freedom. And freedom does not kneel," the crowd roared back, the chant shaking the very walls. Freedom or death. Freedom or death. The war was no longer at the border. It spilled into the veins of the country. Convoys of mercenaries pushed toward the capital, ambushing villages, burning crops, leaving behind ashes and silence. But each time they advanced, they met resistance fiercer than expected. Farmers turned their plows into barricades. Hunters stalked the invaders through forests they did not understand. Young girls carried messages across enemy lines faster than radios could. Every citizen became a weapon, every street a trap. Still, the enemy pressed closer. One night, as Ibrahim sat, with his closest guards reviewing intercepted communications, the compound shook with an explosion. Windows shattered, alarms screamed, dust filled the air. The palace was under direct attack. His guards rushed to shield him, but he shoved them aside, grabbing a rifle himself. "I will not hide while my people fight," he growled. The enemy had breached the outer gates, aided by insiders who had smuggled explosives into the walls. Flames licked the night sky. Bullets whistled past as Ibrahim and his men took position. He moved like a soldier, not a president, ducking behind sandbags, firing bursts, shouting orders through the chaos. His red beret made him a target, but it also made him a beacon. Soldiers who faltered, seeing him fight at the front, found strength again. Hours stretched like days. The palace became a battlefield, corridors echoing with gunfire, staircases slick with blood. At one point, Ibrahim was pinned down in the courtyard, bullets ricocheting around him. A young soldier no older than 20 threw himself into the line of fire, shielding Ibrahim with his body. The boy fell instantly, his blood soaking into Ibrahim's uniform. For a moment, time froze. The weight of sacrifice hit harder than any bullet. He pressed the boy's hand, whispered a prayer, and rose again, with fury burning in his chest. By dawn, the attack had been repelled, but at a cost. Dozens of young soldiers lay dead, their bodies lined in the courtyard. Smoke rose from the shattered gates, the palace scarred and bleeding but still standing. Ibrahim stood among the fallen, his uniform stained, his eyes dark with exhaustion and grief. He looked at the faces of those who had given everything, and he swore aloud, "Your blood will not be forgotten. This soil will drink no more sacrifice, in vain." But even as the words left his mouth, intelligence reports arrived. The attack on the palace had been only a distraction. Larger enemy forces were massing on the outskirts of the capital. The final strike was coming. There was no time for mourning. He gathered the people once again, this time not just soldiers, but civilians, elders, children, anyone who could hear his voice. "They want us divided," he told them. "They want us broken. But look around you. This is our strength. Not the walls, not the guns, but the hearts standing side by side. When the storm comes, remember this. They fight for money. We fight for our future." The city prepared for the last stand. Trenches dug in the streets, barricades reinforced, rooftops turned into lookout posts. Women boiled pots of water for the fighters. Children carried supplies. Old men sharpened machetes. The capital was no longer a city. It was a fortress of defiance. The night before the final battle, Ibrahim walked alone through the streets. He passed mothers rocking their children to sleep despite the distant thunder of artillery. He passed youths cleaning their rifles with trembling hands but steady eyes. He passed elders praying quietly, whispering blessings for victory. Everywhere he walked, people reached out to touch his arm, to look into his eyes, to draw strength from the fire they saw burning there. And when dawn broke, the enemy came. The horizon blackened with their approach. Trucks, armored vehicles, mercenaries armed with weapons gleaming in the morning light. They moved like a machine, confident that the small nation would finally crumble. But as they neared the capital, a sound rose from the streets. It was not the sound of fear. It was singing. Thousands of voices, united in chants of freedom, their song rising louder than engines, louder than guns. The battle erupted with fire and fury. Streets became trenches, windows became sniper nests. Explosions shook buildings, dust choked the air, the ground trembled beneath the clash. Ibrahim was everywhere, firing from rooftops, rallying the wounded, dragging men to safety, his red beret always visible, always at the heart of the storm. His presence alone kept the line from breaking. Hours turned into an eternity. Blood and smoke painted the capital, cries of pain mixed with chants of defiance. The enemy pushed hard, but for every street they took, the people reclaimed 2 more. Ibrahim fought like a man possessed, his rifle hot in his hands, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. At one point, surrounded in a narrow alley, he fought, hand to hand, striking with bayonet and fist until the invaders fell around him. His uniform was torn, his body bruised, but his spirit burned unbroken. By nightfall, the invaders began to falter. Their confidence cracked against the sheer will of a people refusing to kneel. Desertions spread among their ranks, supplies dwindled. And in the chaos, Ibrahim launched the final counterstrike, leading his men in a charge that cut through the enemy lines like fire through dry grass. His red beret was the first over the barricade, the first into the enemy's stronghold, the symbol of defiance they could not kill. The streets echoed with thunder as the people surged forward, overwhelming. The mercenaries with sheer numbers and unbreakable spirit. One by one, the enemy broke, fled, vanished into the night. The capital still burned, but it still stood. And when the last gun fell silent, when the smoke cleared and the dead were carried with reverence, Ibrahim stood upon the battered walls of the palace. His body was weary, his uniform torn, but his voice rose strong. "They thought we would kneel," he cried to the gathered crowd, "but we stand. They thought we would surrender, but we fight. And as long as one heartbeat still drums in this land, Burkina Faso will never fall." The crowd roared back, their voices rising into the night, shaking the earth itself. And in that moment, amidst the ruins and the ashes, a nation was reborn, not in peace, not in comfort, but in unshakable unity. The climax had been reached, the storm endured. The fight for the future was not over, but hope, once fragile, now burned like fire across the land. The morning after the final battle dawned with an uneasy calm. Smoke still spiraled into the pale sky, curling from shattered buildings and burned. Barricades and the acrid scent of gunpowder lingered in the streets. But the city was alive. Survivors moved among the ruins, hands trembling yet steady, searching for friends, family, and neighbors. Every footstep was a testament to endurance, every glance a silent vow. Life would continue, and freedom, though costly, had been claimed. Ibrahim Traoré walked through the streets, his uniform torn, red beret dusted with ash, and his eyes scanning faces etched with grief and determination. He did not rush, did not speak, yet every presence in the city seemed to feel the gravity of his survival, the weight of his leadership. He paused at the first school he had visited before the war, the classrooms now warped by fire, walls cracked, but the spirit of learning still lingering. Children sat huddled together, some barefoot, some clutching charred notebooks, their eyes reflecting the horror of what they had survived. Ibrahim knelt, placing a hand on a young girl's shoulder. "We will rebuild," he said quietly, almost to himself, but the words carried to the children, embedding hope into the soil of their memory. "We will not let this destruction define us. You are the future. You are the promise of this land." Across the capital, the cries of grief mingled with tentative laughter. Mothers wept over the bodies of sons and daughters while fathers cleaned debris from shattered homes. Yet even in sorrow, the people began the first steps toward rebuilding. They gathered bricks, cleared rubble, and carried water to those trapped in collapsed structures. Ibrahim moved among them, not as a distant leader, but as a presence, sharing every ache, every burden. His red beret became a symbol, not of war, but of resilience. The funerals were somber, the streets lined with mourners, young and old alike, carrying the fallen on wooden stretchers draped in national colors. Soldiers, their faces still bruised and bloodied, walked alongside civilians, a living testament to unity born in fire. Ibrahim addressed each group quietly, offering words that held no false comfort, only acknowledgement. They fought for freedom. They fought so we could see the sunrise today. Their sacrifice is not forgotten. It is woven into every heartbeat of Burkina Faso. Even as the city healed, the world could not ignore what had transpired. News of Ibrahim Traoré's leadership, his defiance, and the sheer determination of the people rippled across continents. International commentators, once skeptical or openly hostile, now struggled to reconcile the narrative of a small nation, withstanding the might of mercenaries and foreign pressures. Western capitals sent delegations, not with threats, but with cautious observation, trying to understand how a leader, once underestimated, had managed to galvanize his nation against impossible odds. The reaction was shock, mixed with a grudging respect that could not erase the discomfort of their failed strategies. Ibrahim did not revel in the attention. He convened meetings with his closest advisors and youth leaders, speaking of a future far beyond the battlefield. Victory is not in defeating others, he said. It is in lifting those who have been weighed down by hunger, by neglect, by oppression. The war is over, but our mission has only begun. The next generation will write the story of Burkina Faso, not with bullets, but with knowledge, with courage, with sacrifice for the collective good. Education became the immediate priority. Schools that had been burned were rebuilt with the help of the community, with young men and women taking turns as volunteer teachers. Classrooms filled again, this time with supplies sourced from local craftsmen, teaching not just mathematics or language, but history, civics, and the stories of resistance. Traoré himself visited daily, lecturing to the youth about strategy, leadership, and the importance of understanding both local and global forces. He emphasized that patriotism was not blind loyalty, but active participation in shaping the destiny of one's nation. Sacrifice became a lesson not just spoken, but seen. Families who had lost children in the battle were supported by the community. Memorials were erected in every neighborhood, engraved with the names of those who had given their lives for freedom. The youth, inspired by these acts of courage, pledged themselves to learning, to service, to the rebuilding of the nation. Each step of progress was a testament to the belief that hardship, when met with unity, could forge a stronger, wiser generation. Beyond Burkina Faso, the ripples of Traoré's leadership began to inspire neighboring nations. Students across Africa organized discussions about governance, autonomy, and youth empowerment. Grassroots movements emerged, calling for investment in education, infrastructure, and self-reliance, rather than dependence on foreign aid or exploitation. The continent began to watch as Burkina Faso, once dismissed as small and vulnerable, demonstrated the power of resilience and leadership grounded in service rather than self-interest. Yet the shadow of the West's displeasure lingered. Sanctions were re-evaluated, aid was offered under scrutiny, and foreign embassies adjusted their strategies. But Traoré met these pressures not with aggression, but with calculated diplomacy, refusing to compromise the sovereignty and dignity of his nation. His red beret, once a symbol on the battlefield, now became a diplomatic emblem of defiance and wisdom, representing the ability of a leader to navigate global tension without sacrificing national integrity. At home, the people celebrated cautiously. Markets reopened, crops were replanted, and streets once scarred by bullets and fire echoed with commerce and conversation. Children played in courtyards that had been trenches days before, their laughter a sound more powerful than any cannon. Communities that had been fractured by fear now found cohesion, organized to ensure no family suffered alone. Health services improved as makeshift clinics evolved into fully staffed hospitals, their halls carrying both the stories of survival and the hope of healing. Ibrahim continued to address the youth directly, often speaking in open squares or classrooms. "You are the future," he would say, his red beret catching the sunlight. "But your future must be earned every day through knowledge, through service, through courage. Do not wait for miracles from the outside world. Build them here, within your hands, within your hearts. Sacrifice is not suffering. It is investment in what is greater than yourself. Patriotism is not merely love of land, but the relentless work to see your nation rise, your people flourish, your dreams realized." The story of Burkina Faso became a living legend, documented not in fiction alone, but in the lives of its people. Books were written, songs composed, murals painted depicting the battle, the sacrifices, and the resilience. Ibrahim's own writings emerged as guidance for future generations, emphasizing strategy, morality, and the unbreakable link between education and freedom. Youth reading these works could trace the path from despair to hope, learning that leadership was neither inherited nor bought. It was forged through courage, wisdom, and empathy. Across the nation, the scars of battle remained visible, but they became symbols rather than reminders of defeat. Burned rooftops were covered with murals celebrating resilience. Streets that had run red with blood were now avenues of learning, commerce, and civic engagement. The city itself became a living classroom, teaching that survival without sacrifice was impossible, and that true freedom was maintained through vigilance, education, and unity. Traoré's message to the next generation, crystallized in every institution, every speech, every act of governance. Education was no longer optional. It was patriotic duty. Sacrifice was honored, not mourned. Hope was nurtured, not idealized. He taught that the future of Burkina Faso depended on an engaged, informed, and courageous youth, willing to challenge the world's expectations, willing to face adversity without fear, willing to carry forward the legacy of those who had given everything to secure their nation's freedom. As the sun set over Ouagadougou months later, Ibrahim stood once again on the palace balcony, overlooking a city no longer trembling in fear, but alive with determination. The wind carried the scent of rebuilt markets, flowering gardens, and the distant laughter of children. The people gathered below, young and old, raising their voices in song and celebration. And in that moment, the weight of the past, the blood of the fallen, and the hope of the living converged in a single truth. Burkina Faso had survived, not because it had avoided hardship, but because it had faced it with courage, unity, and vision. The world had watched, and the shock was undeniable. One man had led a nation through near destruction and emerged not as a conqueror, but as a servant of his people. The youth had learned that leadership required sacrifice, wisdom, and an unyielding commitment to justice. And Ibrahim Traoré, red beret bright against the twilight sky, understood that the greatest battle was not over borders or enemies. It was over the minds and hearts of a generation ready to carry their nation forward. The final lesson was clear, carried not in speeches but in the living streets. Freedom must be protected, hope must be nurtured, and education must never be neglected. Patriotism demanded courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to face impossible odds with unwavering determination. And as the people of Burkina Faso looked to the future, they asked themselves the question Ibrahim had posed countless times, now echoing across the continent. Will we rise, not just for ourselves, but for the generations to come? And the answer, alive in every heartbeat, in every classroom, in every step along the rebuilt streets, was a resounding, unbreakable yes.